So today we're gonna go over the differences between conventional deadlifts and sumo deadlifts. And a lot of people get these confused, not because of the foot position or because of how they're specifically doing them, the executions, more so like when they are applicable in a program. So we'll go ahead and start with just demoing the movements, and we'll go ahead and break down where they compare and contrast and how you can actually utilize these different movement patterns in your own programming. So conventional is gonna start shoulder width, typically stance. That's obviously gonna be the big differentiator here between conventional and sumo. Your hands are gonna be outside of your knees and gonna be a little bit more forward knee translation with your knees inside of your elbows. Chest gonna be up a little bit more, but in general, you're going to be in a more traditional deadlift stance here. So you're gonna drive a little bit more off the ground with your quads while closing your knees and your hips at the same time. So pretty standard here with the conventional deadlift. I think most people will understand pretty much how that looks. And just continuing with the reps. So now we're going to sumo. So with the sumo stance, you don't want to be extremely wide like this. Most people are not gonna have the hip mobility to get into this wide of a stance. Conversely, you also most likely don't want to be in this really close hybrid stance. Some people will prefer this type of stance, but for what we're gonna go with, I like to go a bit wider here. So for me, my shins are about on the rings. For a shorter person, might need to bring them in a little bit more. But this is mostly catering towards my own hip mobility. Whenever I'm getting into this position, I'm gonna be abducting, pushing my knees out, and externally rotating my hips to make sure that at the bottom, my shins are vertical and my chest is over the bar. So I don't wanna be leaning too far forward. I don't wanna be falling backwards. I wanna make sure my chest is over the bar and everything is tight at the bottom. So as I pull off the ground, I wanna initiate by actually driving with my quads and then closing the gap with my hips at the top. So the first probably quarter of the movement is all driving off the floor with the quads. We'll go through a couple reps here. So now we're gonna go ahead and go over like the application differences between the conventional and sumo deadlift. So for conventional, I mostly am going to recommend people with posterior chain deficiencies go with conventional deadlifts because you're gonna get a lot more hip flexion, more direct hip flexion, you're getting more hamstring lengthening. And in general, it's much more of a posterior chain focused deadlift variation than sumo is. Whereas sumo, your torso angle is much more upright. You're actually squatting down a little bit more into the rep, using a lot more adductors, a lot more hips. And in that case, someone who has maybe like a low back injury, someone who needs to bring up specifically their hips and their hip strength, or someone who's going for peak strength might choose sumo deadlifts because most people are gonna be a little bit more strong on a sumo pattern. It's gonna be a little bit more leverage friendly. But in general, conventional is going to play a massive role in bringing up posterior chain development. Sumo deadlifts generally gonna be more strength applicable. So that's kind of how I look at those two variations.